In 1717, Blackbeard's crew voted on whether to go to war. Not the captain, the crew. Every man on that ship, including escaped slaves, held an equal vote on every major decision. You never learned that in school. They made sure of it. And the reason they buried it is darker than anything Blackbeard ever did with a pistol. Everyone knows the image. The man with lit fuses braided into his beard, smoke curling around his face like he was conjured from a nightmare. Blackbeard Edward Teach, or Thatch, depending on which record you find, terrorized the Atlantic coast from 1716 to 1718. He captured over 40 ships. He blockaded the port of Charleston. He was the most feared pirate in the British Empire. That's the story they gave you. What they didn't give you was this: Blackbeard wasn't just a pirate. He was a founding member of one of the most radical democratic experiments in the Western world, a functioning parliament of outlaws operating out of Nassau in the Bahamas, 60 years before the American Revolution put democracy on parchment and called it new. Nassau in 1716 was not a city. It was a wreck of a settlement on New Providence Island, rotting fortifications, no functioning government, abandoned by the crown. Pirates moved in. And what they built there was documented by the merchants they robbed, the governors who reported to London, and the pirates themselves. They called it the Flying Gang, but it functioned like a parliament. Every ship operating out of Nassau drew up articles, written constitutions, signed by every crew member before a voyage. Those articles dictated exactly what each man was owed from every prize. Captains were elected. Captains could be voted out mid-voyage if the crew found them unfit. A ship's quartermaster, elected separately, held equal authority to the captain in matters of discipline and plunder distribution. Blackbeard's crew included men of at least 5 nationalities and documented freed and escaped African men who held the same vote as any Englishman on board. That last part is why the record gets thin. The British government knew exactly what was happening in Nassau. Governor Woodes Rogers was dispatched in 1718 specifically to destroy it, not just the piracy, but the system underneath it. He arrived with a royal pardon in one hand and a hangman's noose in the other. What's in the historical record about why he was sent is remarkably sparse. The orders focus on piracy. They don't mention the articles. They don't mention the voting. They don't mention the governance. But Rogers' private correspondence does. He described the Nassau pirates as a commonwealth of thieves. That word, commonwealth, was not an accident. In 1718, commonwealth was a loaded term. It meant a self-governing body, a republic. It was the word once used for the government that executed King Charles I. Rogers wasn't chasing pirates. He was crushing a republic. Here's what doesn't add up. We have 30 years of detailed scholarship on pirate articles. Historians have studied the economics, the maritime law, the violence in exhaustive detail, and none of it is taught in schools. The Thibodaux massacre, the Bisbee deportation, events scrubbed because they were politically inconvenient, those required active suppression. But the pirate parliament wasn't suppressed by silence. It was suppressed by reframing. You were given Blackbeard the monster, the smoke, the pistols, the severed head. Because if you knew what he was actually building, you'd ask a very different question. Not how was he stopped, but who had the most to lose if it survived. Follow the money. Always follow the money. The Atlantic slave trade in 1718 was the single most profitable system in human history. British merchant houses, the same ones Blackbeard robbed, were underwriting it. The colonial plantation system required a permanent, legally enforced underclass. Enslaved Africans were cargo. They were property. The entire architecture of Atlantic commerce depended on that designation holding. Blackbeard's ship had men on it who had escaped that system. And they voted, not as property, as members of a parliament with equal shares and equal say. If that model spread, if sailors, the most mobile workforce in the world, carried that idea port to port from Nassau to Charleston to London, the entire structure falls. Because the argument for slavery was never purely economic. It was ontological. It required that certain people simply did not count as people. A ship's article listing a black man's share of plunder next to a white man's was a direct refutation of that argument. In writing, with signatures. The British Crown didn't destroy the pirate parliament because pirates were criminals. They destroyed it because pirates had produced documents, dozens of them, that treated human beings as human beings before any government in the Western world was willing to do the same. That's what Rogers went to Nassau to burn. Think about what you were taught instead. Pirates were chaos. Their ships were floating anarchies. Their deaths were justice. That framing didn't happen by accident. It was constructed by the same colonial apparatus that needed the Atlantic trade undisturbed. The historians who wrote the first academic accounts of Golden Age piracy were funded by governments descended from the ones that hung those pirates. This is how history gets buried, not by burning libraries, by deciding which details are colorful and which are dangerous. Blackbeard's beard gets remembered. Blackbeard's parliament does not. One question historians still can't settle: how many ships' articles were never found? Rogers burned what he could, but sailors carried copies. Copies get hidden. Copies get passed down. Somewhere there may be a signed document listing men as equals that predates every founding charter you were taught to revere. If it exists, ask yourself why no one's funded the search.